So this one wasn't actually on the itinerary, but it's something we felt important to talk about. Um, in some ways, I think more so to jumpers who don't use the high performance landing area than jumpers who do use it. So just by a show of hands, who knows what the HPLA is? Most people. Okay, and just keep your hand up if you think that anybody swooping should be in the HPLA. Okay, so anybody doing a swoop in the HPLA. What about if they're doing a 180-degree turn? Should they be in the HPLA? Still some debatable. What about if they're doing a 270-degree turn? Should they be in the HPLA? We still haven't got quite all the hands up, but we're getting there. Okay, so that's some of the information I just want to try and make sure everybody knows, but not just swoopers as well. So to start off with then, some definitions. A high performance landing is any form of landing where you have deliberately increased your speed. Um, Sometimes people undeliberately, is that the right word, increase their speed, but a high performance landing is when we have deliberately done something to increase our speed. We could do that using the toggles, just a slight pull down and then letting them up will surge our canopy and increase our speed for landing. Quite an effective technique if done at the right altitude. We could do that using our rear risers. We could just pull on one of them, create a turn, which would increase our speed. Or the more typical way we see people, we think about people doing it, is we use our front risers to dive the canopy. And then maybe we create a turn after that. I actually don't use any of the risers when I'm doing my high performance turn. I use the harness at this point. So high performance landing, any kind of landing where we have increased our speed. A PLA is a suitable area in which it is intended parachutists land. That's from the ops manual, and that could be all of our area out here is our PLA, and then we have a smaller area which we think of the actual PLA where we normally try to land. And a HPLA is the landing area where any turn greater than 90 degrees should happen. So that might be different from what some people put their hands up earlier. The HPLA isn't actually for all high performance landings. It's for landings where the final turn is greater than 90 degrees. Now, the reason for that is because what we normally do, the normal thing to do, is our final turn is 90 degrees or smaller. So anybody who's doing something that isn't the normal, which is a larger than 90-degree turn onto their final turn, should be in the not normal area, the HPLA, so we can predict what they're going to be doing. So the aim of the HPLA, the reason they were introduced, is to make traffic predictable. We want to be able to look at someone going into that area and know that, okay, their plan was to do a turn greater than 90 degrees onto their final. That's what I'm looking and expecting them to do. And anybody not in the HPLA, in the standard landing area, we can look at them and think they shouldn't be doing any turn greater than 90 degrees. I'm expecting them to do a 90-degree turn for their next turn. And the reason we have that, another reason, is to reduce the risk of canopy collisions throughout our canopy flight. So if we know what someone's doing in front of us, we can move around to get into a right place to anticipate their next move. High performance landings, we'll come on to that actually. And we're also reducing the risk of collisions actually in the landing area. So when people have increased their speed for landing, they've done a high performance turn, they're traveling faster across the ground at the point that they're landing. And there's other people in the landing area. Some of them anticipate that. Hopefully you guys, whilst you're setting your brakes and that sort of thing, are turning to look back up the landing area where the canopies are coming so we can avoid anybody landing towards us. But we have people in our landing area who don't know that information. Tandem skydivers, they've just landed, have a great time, thumbs up. They're not expecting to get hit by a parachute in the next moment. So by moving the faster landings into a separate area, and at least knowing where we expect them to happen, we can mitigate that risk a little bit. And the last reason why I think we should have a HPLA is I believe it improves the canopy piloting of all jumpers. Now, that takes some justification for me to say that. It would be quite easy for us as a center, or any center out there, to say, Well, a HPLA, that requires more space. We need more grass to do it. That's quite a faff for us. Maybe we just say nobody does turns greater than 90 degrees. Then we don't even need a HPLA. But actually, if we consider the top tier of canopy piloting, most of the canopy coaches we can think of out there, they are people who enjoy doing turns greater than 90 degrees. We need to, as a center of excellence, facilitate the top tier of canopy piloting at our drop zone. So we encourage those top tier coaches to be here and delivering coaching at the beginner level to all of you guys. Not all of you guys, some of you guys. Some of you are not beginners. So yeah, we must facilitate that top level so that we have the knowledge here in our instructors, in our coaches, to be able to filter that down throughout all jumpers. And we need a HPLA to do that. We need a HPLA to facilitate having the top tier of canopy piloting here. Why separate high performance landings from non-high performance landings? And we could just have them all landing in the same area. That's what we used to do. I'm going to try to illustrate that with a video. It doesn't quite show the full story, but at least grab your attention for a second. Remembers to turn his camera. So sorry, so it's people want to proportion blame in these things. It's the first thing we want to do. We want to look at a video and work out whose fault it is. It's not easy to do that from a video. We don't know what the rules were at that drop zone. You know, were they both supposed to be landing in that area? Were they supposed to be swooping at all? Should they have been on a hop and pop pass? We can actually see that the lower person involved is at this point horizontal, which to me tells me they were doing a turn greater than 90 degrees as well. Both of these people are swoopers. And arguably, if they weren't both swooping, the closing speed would have been higher, and it probably would have resulted in a much worse case in what they actually ended up with. You'll be pleased to know that both of the people in this incident actually escaped with minor injuries. One sprained an ankle and one broken arm. So a good result. But part of the reason we have a HPLA is to try and avoid these kind of canopy collisions, avoid having people below us. So are canopy collisions more likely in a high performance turn? Well, I think that's actually a little bit debatable. I know from my experience I've done quite a few high performance turns. Now that I have the awareness, actually being higher up above other jumpers gives me a really good perspective of what's going on below me for the entirety of my canopy flight and my setup for that turn. Also doing a larger turn, I have many options. I can do an 810 degree turn. If there's someone below me still for that, I can abort that and move on to a next degree of turn. I can go down to a 450 after a longer time. I can go all the way down to a 270, or I can reduce it all the way down to a 90 degree turn and perform a standard landing. I have lots of options available to me, and I have vision of the landing area throughout the whole thing for being up higher. So I actually think normally when people are involved in canopy collisions to do with swooping, I think sometimes they actually knew the traffic was there. And that's what's happened abroad and in other countries. I think they are aware the traffic was there, and then they make poor decisions to carry out the high performance maneuver anyway. Perhaps because they have no plan B. They weren't prepared to move on to a smaller degree of turn. Perhaps they're feeling a financial pressure. I've just paid £24 for my jump. I don't want to abort my swoop, the only thing I went up there to do, and do something else. Perhaps they're feeling the time pressure. Oh, it's just taken me an hour to get ready for this jump. I'm going to have to abort my turn, and then I'm going to have to pack and manifest again. So I'll just do it anyway. Perhaps they're feeling peer pressure. maybe they land and they've aborted the turn, they've made the right decision, and their friends say to them, oh, you didn't swoop, you had to give up on it, did you? And that's pressured them into doing a maneuver anyway, but they should never have done in the first place. So we want to get rid of all of these things. That's actually going to keep us safer than a HPLA might. We want people to not feel that pressure, to teach people about risk assessment if you're a swooper and a normal jumper. Have you really taken 5 minutes to talk to yourself before the jump and made sure that you are fully prepared to give up on whatever maneuver it is you were going to do? Are people filming me? Am I feeling the pressure to do a really good swoop because I want to look cool on the video? No, I've taken 5 minutes. I don't care that much. I can go up again later if I need to. And I think that's a powerful tool for swoopers to just internalize how willing you are to give up on that maneuver at any point, but also for normal jumpers as well. Lastly, I think people are unaware of the actual distances they travel during a turn. And some of the greater degrees of turns we do, we can move a long way over the ground. So even though they've seen the traffic, they really didn't think that they were going to move into that traffic throughout their turn. So I want you guys to understand that as experienced jumpers, because I need you to realize that to err is human. We must expect the swoopers to make mistakes so that you can do your part to stay out of the danger zone as well. It would be nice to think that they're perfect and we could put all of the blame onto them, but if they've made a mistake, how can you mitigate your involvement in the mistake? So responsibilities we all have as skydivers, we should all be in our area. If there is a HPLA and we're supposed to be in the standard landing area, you should do your absolute best to be landing in the standard landing area. And in the past, we've said that you can land in the HPLA if you need to, and that is still true, but you must appreciate that it is a higher risk area. In the same way that landing on the runway increases your chance of being hit by an aircraft, landing in the HPLA and overflying it unnecessarily increases your chances of being in a collision. So in any cases where you can avoid it, at our drop zone or other drop zones, you should avoid it because it has increased your chance of being involved in an incident. Be predictable throughout your canopy flight. So the whole point of this was to be predictable. If you guys are throughout your pattern doing turns greater than 90 degrees, or maybe you're going out quite far one way and coming back with a full 180 to get into the right place, you're not being predictable. So actually the point of making a predictable landing area has backfired as well. So it's on all of us to be predictable. And lastly, I'm going to say that we should all be landing with the arrow. I think the culture in skydiving is changing more and more and more. We're moving from, in the past, having used a windsock to be our main landing direction indicator. And a lot of drop zones around the world now are using a T permanently or an arrow. And that idea of which one should we be using, which one trumps us, is changing at a lot of drop zones. So changes at Skydive Langer in 2023 to help try and make our HPLA safer. We're going to have the arrow always out. So we're just going to make that the SOP. The arrow will always be out, and we expect all jumpers to follow the arrow. And it might be the case often that it is completely lined up with the windsock. And all it is there is an extra landing direction indicator. Or some days it might be slightly tweaked from the windsock to increase our safety. Maybe that just keeps people further away from the beer line. Maybe it's because the windsock's flapping around and actually it's safer for us all to just go one direction rather than having people chase the windsock. And the second thing we're going to change is we're going to have a HPLA indicator out more often. Now, that's not so relevant for people who aren't using the HPLA, but for people who are using it, it's just a way that we can ensure they know which of the HPLAs we are using if we are having days where that is confusing. So here's what our HPLA will start looking like. In this situation, we're looking at a predominantly west landing. So the normal PLA, the standard PLA is here. The HPLA in the past in this direction used to be separated by the windsock. We've moved that further north to the north side of the hangar to make more space for people doing a standard landing. However, we have introduced this kind of warning band, if you like, between us and the windsock, because we have found people are more often than we would like beer lining it. So we just want to encourage people to be landing on the far side of the windsock in all directions. These changes, by the way, we hope to introduce by the 31st of March, so nothing's changing immediately. In this case, if we were landing to the west, the yellow arrow will be out pointing that way, and we may use an orange band to indicate that the HPLA is the one running east to west. If we're landing to the east, it's the same thing, just in reverse. But again, we've moved that HPLA further to the north, the far side of the hangar, to make more space for people doing a standard landing pattern. To the south then, we've moved the HPLA again further to the north. It's still the band separated by the windsock and the beer line, but by creating more of a no-go zone over here for the swoopers, we've created a band where we hope it'll be safer for people to walk through that area. And to the north again, slightly reversed, but with everything further north. So any questions so far, by the way? I haven't given many opportunities. Yes, Ed?
What happens if you land in the warning area, the orange warning area?
That's a good question. So hopefully you guys know that Richard and I spend a lot of time on drop zone control. And neither of us are the type to shout particularly. We like to try and educate people in other ways. So one thing we've found often in the last year is when people beerline it, we don't, or fully beerline it at the moment, we don't really have a way to enforce them. We used to find that being able to tell people to go and put £20 behind the bar and pay their beer fine was a pretty good incentive to not beerline it and to be safe. But actually with so many more jumpers out there, it's very hard to keep on top of that and actually enforce it. And I don't think people are seeing it as a, what's the right word? A disincentive, yeah, to land in the correct place. So we're thinking about a kind of card system where if you were to fully beerline it, we might, and it wasn't a valid reason, we might give you a kind of yellow card for that. And if you were to land in the warning area without a valid reason, we might again give you a warning. But we're trying to avoid situations where Richard and I have to shout at people because it's not our style. So yeah, in this particular direction, if someone not doing a high performance turn was to land into that warning area, we know that they have increased their chances of being involved in a collision. So that is a situation where we would give them a warning of some kind and remind them to land on the far side of the windsock. Repeat offenders might be asked to stop jumping for the day. Yes, Matt?
Will the grass to the north of the windsock be cut shorter so we're not landing in the long grass?
To the north of the windsock? This grass here?
Yeah.
Yes, the grass will be mown shorter to, we're trying to make all of this grass area basically suitable for jumping. There are plans for in the future to hopefully rent more of this cropped area to turn into landing area for parachuters as well, but we're not quite there because the farmers already have their crops in for the year. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, he's got his disabled badge for his car, so he can park here. They have a little.
Good question. Yes, John.
From the air, if you're not immediately thinking about it, it isn't always obvious where the 90-degree PLA ends and the orange warning zone begins. Is it possible to get one of those cricket or football ground markers with the chalk to actually put a line there? Partly also to remind people walking back, because people get so excited at the end of the jump, they're high-fiving, they're talking about it, and they've wandered through the swooping zone before they even realise they've left the safe landing area.
Yes, we're looking at options for demarking it, if you like. The difficulty is finding things that won't hurt if someone hits them. For all jumpers, we don't want to put hard poles out in the ground, but having something that's also clearly visible from the air and allows us to change between one area or the other. So we're looking into it. Again, it's something we hope to introduce as soon as we can. And we hope that having the secondary marker out will just be a reminder to people of which one is active as well, because we appreciate that's not obvious. If you're not a user of them, you don't have to put much thought into it, so you might not know which one's active. Pookie?
To be really explicit about it, that it always used to be the case, you know, like even if you're not doing a high performance landing, kind of, you know, swooping down the beer line was always kind of, that's the target, right, for a lot of people. So we're just saying that that's never acceptable. You should always be in the green part, regardless. I mean, unless you're doing a high performance landing, with the HPLA, you should always be that side of the
The far side of the windsock, yes. And we hope to expand the grass area out there to make that, you know, it is not the biggest space, the far side of the windsock, especially if people are trying to do pre-declared landings. But just the frequency we're seeing people beer lining it, we have to put that mitigation in for them, I think, just to say that we've created a warning.
The beer lining stuff is normally when the wind's going kind of east-west.
Yeah,
sort of direction.
this one.
One of those.
Yeah. So in this scenario, we would ask people to land the far side of the windsock. And I expect we'll see people occasionally in the warning area, but hopefully we'll have less people. It's almost like landing in this red area has become the warning. Oh, oops, I beer lined it. It's like, actually, that was pretty serious. You're in a car park, you're in the spectator area. That's not just an oops. So we're trying to move the oops area, the warning area, out into the yellow. And the red area is a more serious infringement. We're trying to get back to that.
We're going to move the activity bit for B license and C license a bit further out as well, because otherwise, as soon as you overshoot that, you're in the warning area.
It's a good question, isn't it?
But that circle would now be on the edge of the warning area.
No, it's, you see the big sandy bit there, it used to be a big gravel bit,
Yeah,
that's an actual circle.
I'm not sure how easily you can still see that from above at the moment. But we'll think about it. I think we need perhaps different areas for the pre-declared. Yes, Ed?
Under what circumstances would there not be an HPLA?
Would there not be a HPLA?
Like, is there ever?
Would we close it? Is that the question? I think if it's creating too much confusion, so I'm about to look at some of the scenarios where it does create confusion, because the only ones I've shown you so far are the cardinal points of the arrow, which it works really well. It's very clear from above which HPLA is active for the jumpers, and the swoopers are perfectly parallel to standard landings. But what we don't want to do is decrease the ability of normal people to land, if that makes sense, to make the HPLA be able to stay open. So if there's scenarios where they're just conflicting with each other, that would be a day where we would just choose to close it. So it may include boogies. I don't see a reason to just blanket close them. But if we're struggling with the particular wind direction for that day, then we would choose to close it. The high performance landings are also not allowed on multiplane jumps. And it might be the case that a big way organizer would choose to say everyone does a 90. It's a fairly typical thing as well. Yep.
So 2 scenarios. So if the wind's coming from the north,
yep,
and you've got, you know, regular people just doing downwind base leg into wind, that means they're coming down this side of the warning,
yep,
base leg across, turn in, which could be. So is that the point of moving the HPLA kind of further north?
Yeah,
Is that the expectation? That removes that conflict?
It reduces it, but we can never get away from this fact that there will be times where there's going to be a conflict, and we just have to rely on those swoopers, I hope, to make the right decision. But by separating them a bit more and encouraging you guys or people doing a standard landing to stay in that area, we help prepare for if the swoopers get it wrong.
And the second one is when people are kind of training, kind of so that they can do
Yeah.
One of the things that seems to be quite common is doing the big old stall surge thing and just like going around, you just get used to that.
Yeah.
If that's done in the middle of a standard pattern, that can be really surprising to the people that are just behind. You just suddenly get a canopy in your face. I don't know what you can do about that because they have to learn something.
No, I agree with you. I think they're doing something that's not predictable or normal. That should happen on a hop and pop pass. But from speaking to canopy coaches out there and other people doing this thing, most of us are agreed that that shouldn't be happening in a normal pattern. It's unpredictable. It's like driving down the motorway and slapping your brakes on, and all the people behind you get canopy in their face. So I hope coaches will move away from teaching that as something that you do during a pattern, because it's not something you should do during a pattern.
That is how they teach mounties right now.
Some coaches do, and others don't. And the only ones, if they are teaching it, they should be telling people to do that on a hop and pop pass, because you're doing something that's very unpredictable and
not in the kind of regular pattern, because like you say, you're doing it kind of down your base lane, whatever, and somebody's doing it in a little back. That can be disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it to various degrees. What we see a lot of is the full kind of up on the brakes, getting right in the way. And you can do a smaller one where you wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. So as long as people are educated and they're aware of the effect they're having on the people around them, I think that's okay. I think there has been canopy coaches who have just taught, no, if you're doing a 90, you do this and then you do a 90. Yeah.
I'm not sure how this is going to work within you. I think it looks really good, but I'm really thinking about last weekend. I'm always concerned because I'm not doing HPLA.
Yep.
I'm trying to do my 90s, but I'm doing a left-hand pattern, and I'm conscious I'm probably going over the HPLA, or was.
Yep.
And I'm kind of thinking, oh, yeah, there's somebody up there who wants to do an HPLA, and I'm stuck right in the middle of it, and I'm trying to be just predictable.
Yeah.
That's the pressure I'm feeling in doing it, and I'm just wondering what's the question? The question is really, should I be considering? Well, I should be considering it, but what about the other jumper?
There should never be a case where, if you're talking about this situation here, and you're doing a normal left-hand pattern into the PLA, I don't want you to feel that you are in someone's way. It would be inappropriate for them to say, oh, you got in my way, I couldn't swoop. And if anyone did do that, you can come and speak to me and Rich, and we'll.
My job is just get further into the airfield anyway.
That would help mitigate what I talked about earlier, which is sometimes they might just make a mistake. I hope that they won't. But by being further into the airfield, you are removing the conflict of those two patterns. But as I see it as a swooper, I want to be able to swoop. I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I think the way that happens is that we as swoopers fit in, and there's going to be, maybe 1 in 10 jumps where it just doesn't work for the patterns, and swoopers have to at that point go, oh, it just didn't work, I couldn't swoop. It wasn't Henry's fault, he was just doing his normal pattern. I did whatever, I'll do it on the next one. And if we don't get to that point, we're in danger of not being able to do it at all. Ian, I'm going to come back to you because I've got a few more slides, and then so these are some of the situations that I hope the new situation will improve. So these are the ones that we found difficult, where to promote the best landings for most jumpers, we wanted to be able to land into wind. So we put the arrow at a slightly more into wind angle. And people's normal pattern would look like this into the PLA. Fair enough, they've slightly gone out into the HPLA. They've followed the pattern which the arrow is saying to do. I don't blame them for that. So how does the new situation potentially mitigate that? Well, by moving it further north, we've created more space out there for the swoopers. So they need to move out further to the north. They can still clearly see which way it is because they have an indicator, so they know which way they're swooping. And the point where the turn is actually happening is very much further removed from the lower parts of a standard pattern. So hopefully we can see that that's an improvement. Perhaps not perfect, but an improvement is a good thing. Here's another one where we struggled in the past. Again, this was like yesterday's wind. To promote the best landings for people doing a normal pattern, we would put the arrow into wind, and they would do the pattern that arrow is suggesting to do. But the arrow was not clearly telling us which HPLA to use. So you might have some people swooping here and some people swooping here. This is an occasion where we would probably get pretty close. If not, we'd just close the HPLA because it's too confusing. We don't know what's going on. So the new situation, again, by moving it further north, we've separated those patterns more. And by having the option of using a HPLA indicator, we can clearly tell people who are using it but they need to use this area here as opposed to the beer line one. It runs parallel to the area they should be using. So again, an improvement, not perfect, but I hope it will make it clearer from the air which one we should be using, and people doing a normal pattern can still do their normal pattern.
So is that where the indicator is going to be, kind of approximately around the hangar?
Not quite. If you know where the truck is normally parked out there now, there's a section of grass just north of that. We intend to put both the arrow and the indicator there as soon as they're made.
Do we still intend to be refueling planes where the switches are going to be coming out?
At times, yeah, they could be. Yeah.
That's just on us to
Yeah.
not hit the plane.
It is. These things are always on us as all jumpers, not just swoopers. You know, there are going to be times where from above you can see there is something abnormal. Maybe the plane's fueling, maybe there's someone walking there, maybe there's a truck, and you have to go to plan B.
But will there be rules against, for example, you're not allowed to use the FPLA while the plane's fueling or anything like that?
Not necessarily, because you know we might be fueling in a different area. I think if people are truly qualified to be doing the type of high performance turns we're talking about, I think if they're truly qualified to do that, they are able to risk assess these things from the air. And if they're unable to risk assess them from the air, then they're not actually prepared to be doing it. Because I can create a rule about fueling planes, but what about if the minibus just happens to be there? Or one I've seen before is there's an ambulance in the landing area, and people are unable to look at that and decide to go to plan B and not actually qualified to be doing that particular thing. Yes, John.
This all looks a lot better, but I wondered, how are you going to communicate this to visiting jumpers who already jump at Langer from time to time but won't know about the new plans? Have you thought about that? Because I think it's great for the people that are here and listening, but what about all the people that haven't listened to this talk?
Yeah, and that's why we're aiming for March 31st as an introduction date, because we have the opportunity to kit and dox people. So potentially for this year, we'll look at giving everybody a drop zone brief again, regardless if you've jumped here for 20 years, 30 years, whatever. Everybody will get a fresh drop zone brief. We can just introduce some changes. Another thing another thing we're going to be doing this year is requiring people to fill out a waiver form as a experienced jumper. It has a few things on there, such as following code of conduct. It includes a medical and understanding of the canopy charts, just in case people have missed that in the education at any point. And we have the option then to include things like these changes. And we'll actually ask whether that's completed every year. Just a way to push the information out there and make sure people have seen it on a yearly basis. How are we doing? Yeah, that's about it. So hopefully you will have a slightly better idea about what the HPLA is and why it's good for you to have one as well. So we have all of those fancy swoopers here able to pass that things they've learnt down to you as well, rather than just getting rid of it completely. Thanks very much for listening to me.